The other large complex that is in the Metropolitan Museum of Art is the Temple of Dendur. This is a Roman Egyptian temple that was originally located in Nubia, about 80 kilometers south of modern Aswan. Now you might be asking, why is this temple in New York City? I'll explain it in detail in part 2 of this video, but for a quick answer, it was gifted to the United States by Egypt in the 1970s. Although this temple is built to look like an Egyptian temple, you can technically say that it isn't an Egyptian temple. It was actually commissioned by Emperor Caesar Augustus in 23 BCE. Augustus was born Octavian, and he became emperor after the defeat of Mark Antony and Cleopatra VII. He actually commissioned a few ancient Egyptian temples, but this is one of the few that he commissioned in the south area called Nubia. It was started in 23 BCE by Petronius, a Roman governor of Egypt at the time, and it was finished in 10 BCE. To me, it's honestly kind of weird that a Roman emperor would create an Egyptian temple in the colony of Egypt. I would expect him to build Roman temples, but this was part of a strategy to legitimize and maintain his rule. In this temple, he specifically connected his name and the images of the gods Isis and the local cult gods Pedesi and Pihor. Whenever locals visited the temple and brought offerings to the gods, they would also be worshiping Caesar Augustus. Here's an image of the two local cult gods, Pedesi and Pihor, that are seen on this temple. The temple was designed by Egyptian architects in the Ptolemaic and Roman style of Egyptian temples, meaning that they were inspired by earlier temple types. It was made out of a local Nubian sandstone and has a slight pink hue to it. They first built a 30-meter sandstone platform overlooking the Nile, and then there was a 25-meter-long mud brick wall that surrounded the temple complex with a gateway that is called the Luminous Mountain Horizon. This was along the Nile and controlled access to the temple. The temple building is made up of 3 sections, which you can see that small little drawing there: the pronaos, the antechamber, and the sanctuary. The pronaos is a fancy word for porch. It has 2 large decorated columns with lotus blossom capitals. The antechamber would have been an offering hall where the public would have been allowed to leave offerings. Finally, there would have been a set of wooden doors separating the antechamber from the sanctuary where the gods supposedly resided. This room would have been off limits to anyone but the highest of priests. Inside the sanctuary, there was actually a stone where the sacred bark or boat could have been placed. And a cool fun fact was that there was actually a hidden chamber in the back wall of the sanctuary, but the purpose of this room is unknown. The decoration of this temple includes Augustus as the pharaoh interacting with the gods Horus, Isis, Khnum, Osiris, Mandalus, Nephthys, Thoth, and Harpocrates. Pedesi and Pihor, who I mentioned earlier, are these 2 heroic Nubian brothers who turned into demigods, and they are heavily featured, trying to kind of integrate with the local society. What I really love is that the base of the temple was also decorated with images of papyrus and lotus plants so that it almost looks like they're growing out of the Nile itself. The antechamber and the sanctuary are completely undecorated, except for this image on the back wall of the sanctuary, which shows Pihor and Pedesi worshiping Isis and Osiris. The Egyptian religion didn't last long under Roman rule, so the temple wasn't really used for a good portion of the early Common Era. In the 6th century, Coptic Christians used the temple as a church. Unfortunately, they did carve into several of the walls, including creating doorways, which destroyed some images of the goddess Isis. But the church was deserted in the 13th century. And by the 19th century, when Europeans arrived in Egypt, many of them left graffiti on the walls. Not the ones that you can actually see here, more like carving their name and the year that they came in. Now, no one, and I mean no one, should be defacing artifacts and sites, period. But I also find old, like antique graffiti very interesting. Some of the earliest graffiti actually comes from 1817, which is pretty early, especially how south this is in comparison to more of modern day Egypt. Check back in for part 2, where I'll talk about how and why the temple ended up in New York City.